answer those along the way. We have stopping points. And then you can also put your questions in chat and we'll answer those as well at certain stopping points. You may hear us use the following acronyms, so let's just handle those right now. QZ is our short name for quagga and zebra mussels. They are different subspecies, but for purposes of our program, we treat that they have the same negative consequences, so we're going to treat them the same. So you just hear us say QZ. DBW is State Parks, Division of Boating and Waterways. That's the division that the QZ team here is with. There's CDFW, that's our sister agency, California Department of Fish and Wildlife. OLGA, that's Online Grant Application System, and that is the system that you will use to put in your applications. Then there's EDMM, Early Detection Mussel Monitoring Data. So you'll hear us use that too. All right, in this webinar, you are going to learn that this is an infestation prevention grant program. Therefore, the grant activities need to be focused on prevention, not control, not rapid response. Very important activities, but they're not covered by this program. No matches required, so that's great news, and it is a reimbursement grant. As you listen in, please be aware that all of the grant requirements are reimbursable items, but you have to have asked for them in your grant application, and then DBW has to accept and approve of them. So we don't write in activities for you to be covered. It has to be on the applicant to do that, because not all applicants need all the extras covered. Returning applicants will be especially interested in the slides that come later, slides 29 to 30, and that's where we will highlight a couple of new things for this year. You're going to see snippets on these slides, and some slides have a lot of meat in them. The point, though, is you really need to read the guidelines available on our webpage. We're just going to highlight some things today. Also note we have templates for all of our requirements to make it easy. All right, let's get started. Eddie, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the 2023 unveiling of our program here. I want to make sure I understand.
Can't hear you.
Press upon it. Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. I want to impress upon everybody the importance of this program to California's reservoirs throughout the state. I think we are in our 9th year, and we've basically been investing upwards of $22 million in recreational boating dollars and over nearly 100 projects, I think, nearly 100 projects so far since 2014. And we have not been able to do this journey alone. Our partners at Cal Fish and Wildlife have been instrumental for their role, strategic role, specifically in the field, working with regional scientists performing the critical work that they do. And lastly, I think it's a huge thank you to all of those potential applicants on the phone and those who've come before you to engage with us. It can be a cumbersome process, but I know you all do it to help California's natural resources. So thank you so much, and I'll hand it back over to Kara here.
Thank you, Eddie. Eddie's the chief of the Aquatic Invasive Species Branch, and we're glad that he was there to kick us off. And Eddie's my boss. And then I'm Kara Roderick. I'm the Senior Environmental Scientist Supervisor and honored to lead the small but mighty team here.
Hi, my name is Timothy Giles. I'm the Park and Recreation Specialist for the QZ Grant Program. I'm primarily responsible for reviewing payment requests, program tracking, and compliance.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Mike Rodriguez, or Mike Rodriguez. I'm the environmental scientist with the QZ Grant Program, and my duties are primarily reviewing reports, including early detection mussel monitoring data and outreach coordination.
And my name is Elizabeth Brusati. I'm a Senior Environmental Scientist Specialist with the Department of Fish and Wildlife based out of our Invasive Species Program at headquarters in Sacramento. And I'm here along with several other CDFW staff because we serve as the technical review committee for the grant applications. And I serve as a liaison between our program and Bodie and Waterways grant program. And I also review quagga and zebra mussel prevention plans along with our regional scientists. And so we have several other CDFW staff here. I'll read off their names and ask them to briefly turn on their cameras and introduce themselves. And we have 6 different regions, and Tim is going to put a link in the chat with a link to their contact information. And that link also shows which county each of them cover. And they are your local contact for questions on prevention plans and on monitoring. So they're kind of your first point of contact for that information. And so with that, let me go ahead and read off names. So first, from headquarters, Tomas, who is our supervisor for the quagga and zebra mussel program.
Morning, everybody. Yeah, as Elizabeth said, senior supervisor with CDFW's headquarters with the quagga zebra mussel project. And just also want to second what Eddie just said. Thank you all for endeavoring on this, planning and implementing your prevention programs, which is huge in helping us all, including you, preventing the spread of these mussels. And I'm turning it over to the really important people from our program, the regional scientists, which are the ones that are helping you with your grant applications as needed, and also with planning and implementing your programs. So, good morning, everybody.
Thank you, Tomas. And now for regions. So region 1 is our northern region.
Good morning. Thank you for the introduction. My name is Kristen Hubbard. I'm, like Elizabeth said, with the northern region covering Lassen, Modoc, Siskiyou, Trinity, Tehama, Shasta, Del Norte, Mendocino, and Humboldt counties. Thank you.
And then region 2 is our north central region.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Angie Montalvo. I'm the AIS Quagga Zebra Mussel Coordinator for Region 2. I have approximately 17 to 20 counties, overlapping a couple of the other areas. So nice to meet everyone.
And then region 3 is the Bay Delta region, and we have 2 regional scientists there. So I'll let Catherine and Hannah introduce themselves.
Hello, I'll go first. I'm Catherine Mandela, and yeah, the Bay Delta region, we cover 13 counties around the Bay, and there's lots of water in our region. So now there's 2 of us, so I'll hand it over to Hannah, who's my partner in crime.
Hello, everyone. My name is Hannah Giles, and yeah, I'm Catherine's partner, another environmental scientist from Region 3.
And then region 4 is the central region.
Hi, everyone. My name is Robert Domnowski. I'm the Region 4 regional biologist. I cover essentially all the South Valley from Stanislaus County south to Kern County and out west from there as well.
And region 5 is the South Coast.
Good morning, everyone. I'm John O'Brien. I'm the fisheries supervisor for the South Coast Region 5, and that's the 5 coastal counties from Santa Barbara down to San Diego.
And then we have region 6, which is the Inland Deserts.
Hi, my name is Ken Sankery. I'm the environmental scientist for Region 6, and my counties cover Imperial, Riverside, San Bernardino, Inyo, and Mono counties.
All right, next slide. All right, thank you, everyone. Good to see your faces too. Today, we're going to cover the overview of the program, kind of our nuts and bolts. And then we'll also have a smaller segment on Olga. That's the online grant application system that I already mentioned, and that's where you will put in your applications. Do note that we don't spend as much time on Olga in this webinar because there already is a pre-recorded video on our webpage that covers Olga too. It's about an hour-long video, so that's there all the time. You're welcome to look at that. All right, Thank you.
Okay, here's an update from last year's grant cycle. Last year, we had 10 applications with 8 applicants. All 10 projects were funded for the 2022 grant cycle year. We awarded a total of $2.96 million to our approved grantees. The image you can see here is a map of the reservoirs we funded for the 2022 grant cycle. This, as well as maps from the previous years and a spreadsheet listing the applications and awards for each grant year, are available on our website, which is listed at the end of this presentation. Next slide, please. Okay, since our program's inception, 8 years of awarding cycles, we are starting our 9th year. We've had 95 projects, 62 reservoirs have been funded at least once. Some have been funded for more than one cycle. 42 agencies have been funded at least once. Again, some have been funded more than one cycle, for a total of $21.8 million awarded. Next slide, please.
Okay, I'll be going over our program authority. So the program authority for our program comes from the following statute and regulations sections. They describe the mussel fee stickers and how they're allocated and used. So our primary funding source is the state mussel sticker. And for this grant cycle, we have about 3 million available. These are our DBW regulations, which provide for the collection and use of the state mussel sticker. And these sections and codes can be found in our grant guidelines, also available on our website, and we'll be putting that at the end of our presentation as well. Next, I'll be going over who's eligible for our grant. To be eligible for our grant, you need to meet 3 requirements. First and foremost, the applicant has to be an owner or manager of any aspect of the water in a reservoir. In order to prove this, we'd require ownership management documentation provided with your application submission. And you would either be required to submit a resolution or a letter of approval. Those can vary depending on your agency. So if your agency has a board of approval or board for approval, you'll need to use a resolution template. This can be either a draft or a final template or a final resolution, sorry. And this will be required at the time of application. A final resolution will be required before grant approval. If your agency doesn't have a board, then you'll need to provide a letter of approval, and we will require a final letter of approval at the time of application. The other requirement to be eligible will be the reservoir has to be open to the public for recreation as defined by Water Code section 6004.5. So this cannot be a private reservoir. And next, the reservoir has to be uninfested. Now, this is a prevention grant. So if the reservoir is infested, we cannot fund it. And in order to prove you're uninfested, during the application stage, we require you to submit monitoring data that is no older than March of the previous year. And this would be early detection mussel monitoring data. And at this time, we would just require you submit what you have. It doesn't have to be super thorough, but it does have to be no older than March of the previous year. So in this case, March of 2022. And CDFW will discuss a bit more on this later. These entities are eligible to be applicants as long as they meet the 3 requirements I mentioned on the previous slide. Next, I'll be going over our 2 types of grants. We have Tier 1 grants and Tier 2 grants. So for Tier 1 grants, these are our planning or assessment projects, and these are typically for the preparation or improvement of a prevention plan, and we allow up to $200,000 max funding for these projects. Then we have our Tier 2 grants, which most of our grantees at the moment, I believe, are Tier 2 grants. These are our implementation projects. So in order to qualify for a Tier 2 grant, you must have a CDFW accepted prevention plan. And these are typically projects that implement the prevention plan, and we allow up to $400,000 max funding for these projects. We also have a Tier 1 and Tier 2 project comparison chart on our website. If you're still unsure about which grant or which tier you need, you can check that out, and I'll be showing that at the end of our presentation. And again, these are no match required for these grants. Next, we'll talk about Tier 2, how you need a CDFW letter. And Elizabeth, if you can add some more information.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, I'll go through the process to get an acceptance letter for your prevention plan. And again, these are only for the Tier 2, the implementation grants. And so this requirement to have an acceptance letter reviewed by CDFW and an acceptance letter is due to regulations that came into effect in 2016. And so the first step is that you submit your plan to CDFW's regional scientist, and they and I will review them and return comments. And then you resubmit the plan when you've addressed those comments. And once we feel that it meets our code and regulations, we give you an acceptance letter. And one thing I do want to point out here is that this letter is required by the application deadline for these grants. And quite honestly, it usually takes at least a couple of months to go through this process. So if you have not already, if you don't have a prevention plan with a letter, quite honestly, you have not submitted one to us for review yet, you're not going to have time to get it done before this year's application deadline. So my recommendation in that case is that you consider either applying for a Tier 1 grant this year to help you write a prevention plan, or plan on applying for Tier 2 next year and use the time to put together a plan and get your letter. And this is required, again, like I said, the regulations came into effect in 2016. So if you have an older plan, I've seen some plans that are 10 or more years old, that needs to be reviewed by us to get this letter to meet these more recent regulations. Now, if you have an acceptance letter dated after 2016, you're fine. You will upload your plan and a letter that go along with it as part of your Tier 2 application. You don't need to get a new letter from us every year. Just, the letter that you got whenever a couple of years ago is fine. You do need to re-upload them every year, but it's the same letter. There is no expiration date on either the plans or the letters. And if you're not sure if your plan qualifies or if you have the right letter, please contact me or the regional scientist, and we can let you know if it's what you need for this grant cycle. And if you need more information on writing prevention plans in general, we have on our website a recording of a webinar that I gave a year or so ago that talks about prevention plans in more detail. And again, I or the regional scientist can give you the link to that if you need more information. So I'll turn it back over to you, Mike.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Next, we'll be talking about Tier 1 planning or assessment project ideas. Now, these are a few examples that we have for projects. Typically, the Tier 1 is for a revision or preparation of a prevention plan. And early detection muscle monitoring. So collecting early detection muscle monitoring and reporting that data back to us is a requirement of the grant. So applicants may wish to ask for funding for this. And typically, the purpose of the Tier 1 project or Tier 1 grant is so grantees can get their prevention plan accepted by CDFW. And personnel time and travel, such as mileage specifically related to the above activities, is typically funded as long as it's asked for. Elizabeth, if you can add some information on water chemistry monitoring.
Sure. So just to specify here, when we're talking about water chemistry, what we're mostly interested in is calcium and pH, because those are major determinants of how much risk your reservoir has to these mussels becoming established. And just to make it clear, the water chemistry monitoring is not something that's required for the grant, and it's not required for a prevention plan. It's just something that is helpful because it gives you a better idea of the risk level. And it is something that DBW uses if you do receive a grant to determine some of the mussel monitoring requirements.
Next, we'll be going over Tier 2 implementation ideas. I think, no, I didn't skip one, sorry. So these are ideas for an implementation project. Please refer to the guidelines for a longer list of examples, but even the guidelines don't have an exhaustive list. We're asked about new things every year, and this must always go through our review team. And so I'm going to take a break right here to read through some RSVP questions that were submitted beforehand. And so the first question we have regarding outreach specifically is, can we utilize grant funding to cover costs associated with education and outreach via subcontracted marketing agencies who use radio and social media for public outreach? The answer to this is yes, this type of work is reimbursable. However, this must be included within your scope of work and table of deliverables, as well as in your task budget and line item budget within your application submission. This would be denoted as a consultant in your budgets. The grant funding can only be used in this manner if agreed upon by DBW. The next question we have is, will the grant reimburse recipients for staffing outreach events and providing outreach materials to complete grant-required outreach events? And the answer to that is yes, this type of work is reimbursable if it is included in your application and is agreed upon by DBW. A friendly reminder that incentives are not reimbursable. And please note that outreach requirements are for Tier 2 grants only, not Tier 1 grants. All right, we shall continue moving on. Here we have some examples of past funded Tier 2 projects. So the first picture on the left, we have an example of ramp monitoring being conducted at Lake Berryessa. The second picture in the middle, we have an example of an outreach booth at Clear Lake. And the third picture on the right is an example of a decon unit, in this case hydropads, at Comanche Lake. Next, I'll go over non-reimbursable items. So again, please read the guidelines. This is not an all-inclusive list. And I'd like to point out a few specific ones. So first, costs incurred outside of the terms of the grant agreement. So anything outside of the grant agreement is not reimbursable. Next, personnel leave time, such as sick leave or vacation. This is not reimbursable. And then incentives for outreach. Incentives are not reimbursable. And I'll stop to see if, did we receive any questions in chat?
No question. One.
Okay. Then we did receive a question that was submitted with an RSVP. So the question reads, can we utilize grant funding to cover costs associated with concessionaire incentive programs to encourage privately operated boat launch facilities to be more proactive in QZ inspections? The answer to this is no. Grant funding cannot be used towards incentives or incentive programs. Grant funding can be used towards consultant work regarding inspections and decontaminations, so long as these tasks are agreed upon with DBW. The next question we have is, can grant funds support monitoring efforts for water bodies that are hydrologically connected to the main reservoir that is included in a Tier 2 grant? A connected water body would need to be monitored, but might not fall under the jurisdiction of authority of the agency receiving the grant, but still poses a threat of mussel introduction. And the answer to that is no. QZ grant funding can only be used towards work at the reservoir that DBW approved which has owner/management authority. We encourage all owners and managers of reservoirs in your watershed to apply to the QZ grant program. And as a reminder, we will be uploading these questions and answers onto our webpage after the presentation. So we'll keep moving on. Next, I'll be going over early detection muscle monitoring data. Now, EDMM is a covered grant item, but you must ask for it in your application and DBW must approve of it. The EDMM has to be no older than March of the previous year, so in this case, March of 2022. And CDFW might already be doing some EDMM monitoring in your reservoir. Please check with them and see in case you have any questions. Elizabeth, would you like to provide further information?
Sure. So yes, first of all, for the application itself, there's some flexibility in the type of monitoring data you can provide. So again, it's possible CDFW is doing some monitoring there. So if you're not sure, you can contact the regional scientists. They might be able to provide some data. Then if you do receive a grant, be aware that the monitoring requirements are going to be fairly strict. There's a link in the slide here. It's also described in the grant guidelines. But there is a very specific monitoring prescription that will be written into your grant agreement with Boating and Waterways. And that may be more extensive than what you wrote into your prevention plan. So just realize that you will be required to do what Boating and Waterways is requiring, even if it's more than what's in the prevention plan, because specifically they are giving you funding and therefore they have the authority to require some additional monitoring there. And again, if you have questions on this type of monitoring or what you might be asked to do, talk to DBW regarding the grant. And you can also talk to your regional scientists. But one other thing to be aware of is that CDFW cannot commit to doing the monitoring that is required for the grant. So don't apply for a grant thinking that CDFW will take care of all your monitoring for you. Even if we're doing some monitoring in your reservoir already, we simply don't have the staff capacity to increase our monitoring to the level that's required for these grants. So you, as the agency responsible for the reservoir and as the grantee, will be responsible for making sure that monitoring gets done. So like Kara said, you can put it, like Mike said, you can put it in the your budget. So just, plan that out as part of your application. I think that's all I have to say on that.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Here's some further early detection muscle monitoring data. So applicants can upload their CDFW required annual report in support of muscle monitoring data. And here's the data that must be included when using your own format. And I will turn this over to Kara.
Yes, so we just encourage you to go back to the guidelines again. And in section 3.0, that is where you will find the list of the required documents that need to be included in your application. Next slide. All right, proposal limitations. This one has a lot to unpack, so stay with me, I'll go slow. So there can only be one project per application. So it's going to either be a tier 1 project or a tier 2 project. Now, applications with more than one reservoir have to carry out the same project at those reservoirs. So, for example, if the project is for a tier 2 implementation project, and let's say it's to do watercraft inspections, then that same exact project needs to be carried out at the second reservoir. Okay, so in other words, in this one application, you couldn't have inspections at one reservoir and say an ask for a mobile decon unit at the second reservoir. They have to be the same. In that case, if you wanted 2 different kinds of projects, you would just put in 2 different applications. Okay, the next one is a tier 1 project can include more than 2 reservoirs per application. Okay, and the reason for that is a tier 1 project is for developing or improving prevention plans. So we like the idea, and we have enough funding with up to 200,000 to lump a whole bunch of reservoirs, which are the same project, into a tier 1 application. But when it comes to a tier 2 project, we have the limit of 2 reservoirs only. That's the maximum. So again, if you wanted to do more reservoirs for tier 2, you just have to put in more applications. Okay, and then the last bullet is you can submit more than one application. There's no limit there, but if you do that, you do need to prioritize in Olga, your first, second, third, fourth priority. Okay. We might get some questions on this one. All right, but I'll go ahead and keep going. Project slide. So let's see, project selection criteria, scoring and ranking. Please refer to the guidelines, section 6. And this is just to highlight that we have our interagency team, our CDFW sister agency, that helps us review all of the applications, the regional staff and the headquarters staff there. And then our DBW team reviews the applications. And then the final decision is by Eddie Hard, who you met at the beginning. We do have on our webpage a scoring and ranking document. You can see that if you'd like. And then we just look at things like if the application's complete or not. Frankly, if it's not complete, then the application doesn't move on. We look at the value for infestation prevention, the technical feasibility. They're 2-year grants. So we look at that very carefully to see if it looks like the project could get completed in 2 years. The goals, the deadlines, and demonstrate the likelihood, I already said, to be completed within the 2 years. Did we have a question in the chat? You want me to do it later? Okay. Higher priority projects. Next slide, please. This is just to highlight that it's a competitive grant. So if we're in the case of having to make those difficult decisions, we look at those that are, so this slide is to highlight both for tier 1 and tier 2 projects. We look at if they have a higher risk of infestation based on the risk of mussel introduction. We look to see if in the narratives, there's a template for narratives. If in the narratives, there's a discussion about this agency coordinating regionally with other agencies. And we look to see if the application demonstrates the unique economic and ecological and rec impacts to rural and urban reservoirs. And if that's been incorporated, of course, into the prevention plan, or if this is a tier 1 application, if the plan is to incorporate that into the prevention plan. Next slide. And then this slide is highlighting just for tier 2 projects. And in this case, we look at the higher risk of mussel establishment based on water chemistry. So for example, the higher the calcium. If the project involves significant construction or ground disturbance, then the CEQA and NEPA process must already be complete, and that documentation needs to be uploaded into Olga. And again, that's because this is a 2-year grant. And we had learned, lessons learned were that sometimes it can take that long, a year or two, to get CEQA completed, and in which case our applicants weren't doing the project in time. And, you know, it's a competitive process. So we want to make sure that we give funding to those that can complete the project in 2 years. So in the case of, if you still have quite a bit of CEQA and NEPA to do, we'd say do that now and then apply in the next year or two. Okay. Good, we have the question stop here. Question in the chat?
Yes, we do have one question in the chat, actually with an answer, which I will read,
perfect.
and then I'll let you, if you have any more RSVP questions, I'll let you do those. So first, the question was, last year, CDFW provided a map of all CDFW monitored water bodies in the state. Has that changed this year? That will help us plan around nearby water bodies that do not have an active DBW QZ program. So that's something I was going to refer to Tomas, and he put an answer in the chat as well. So I'll just read that out for everyone can hear it. May need to talk offline about that. Not aware that that such a map exists, but we do have a summary table of monitoring data we have available and linked on our website. So he put a link to that in the chat. So that's something to those of you who, again, need some additional monitoring data or want to know if CDFW has monitoring data from your reservoir, that's a place to start to see if that exists. But we don't have a map already available that shows all the reservoirs that we monitor, and that is something that changes a bit from year to year based on our staff capacity. And so, Mike, I'll let you, if you have any other questions you need to go over, I'll let you do that.
I don't think we have any other RSVP questions for this section.
I'll just mention that all these questions that we have from the RSVP time, as well as the ones that come up in the chat, we will have a document put together that has all this captured, and we'll put this on our website within the week or by next week.
I'll be going over requirements for Tier 1, Tier 2 projects if awarded. So previously, we were talking about requirements for submitting applications. These are if your agency is awarded funding. So these requirements are both for Tier 1 and Tier 2 grants. So we have line item and task budgets and scope of work that must remain consistent. We have our progress reports and invoicing, our annual reports, project summary, all these documents, and our team provides templates for all these documents available on our website. We'll be putting that at the end of the presentation. And as a friendly reminder, we do require early detection muscle monitoring data reported with each quarterly progress report. Some of our returning grantees might note that this is different than they've done previously, but this is a new change. We'll be discussing that more in detail later into the presentation. And I will ask Elizabeth if you have further information on DBW versus CDFW annual reports.
Yeah, let me just address the differences because we've referred to two different types of annual reports, and I know that's caused confusion in the past. So every agency that has a prevention plan is required to turn in an annual report to CDFW by the end of March that covers the previous calendar year. So that's doesn't matter if you have a grant or not, you're supposed to be turning in a report to us to describe what you did in your program the previous year. So, and that annual report is something that you can upload because it contains a summary of your monitoring data. You can upload that with your application as your proof that you've been doing monitoring in the past year. Now here on this slide where it's talking about quarterly progress reports and an annual report, that is an annual report that is specific to this grant. So if you receive a grant, you will need to turn in a different annual report with a different template to DBW, and that is specifically on the activities that are covered in your grant. So just want to be clear that there are two different requirements here and that you should be aware of.
Thank you for that, Elizabeth. Next, I'll be going over additional requirements. These are for Tier 2 projects if awarded. Now, please see the guidelines section 7 for further information. So first we have, it's required you post funding signage within the first year of the grant and include DBW's logo and funding statement on your agency's webpage. Now, regarding the signage, if you're a returning grantee and if your funding sign is still in good shape, you may not need a new sign. If you're unsure, please follow up with us and we can provide further input. Then we have these next two bullet points are situational. So if applicable, so if you're requesting funding for ramp monitor inspections and decontamination, please provide data from ramp monitor contacts for inspection and decontamination activities. Then if you are requesting funding for CEQA NEPA activities, you must provide copies of final CEQA NEPA documentation. And then we have outreach, and that'll be covered in the next slide. So then we have outreach. So outreach, again, this is for Tier 2 projects only. These are if you're awarded, and the goal of outreach is to demonstrate the project's impact impact and an increase in public knowledge about QZ muscle prevention. So we require grantees to participate in at least 3 community outreach events during the term of the grant. These can be either in person or virtual. And we require the grantees to create a survey plan and survey to disseminate to their waterway users. And we do have templates for that available on our webpage. Under our grantee resources webpage, we also have grantee project ideas where you can see some past project ideas and kind of get an idea of what you can do for outreach. Slide. So these are all templates and sample docs that we have available on our webpage, and we'll be putting that into at the end of the presentation for everybody to see. Okay, so I'll stop here and see if we have any questions. Nothing? Okay, then we shall keep moving into revisions since last year. Kara, take it away.
Alrighty. So here are some revisions that have happened since last year. I think that those returning applicants will be interested in this first one especially. So we are going to do a pilot try and change the deadline for payment requests. So they will be due within 30 days of the quarterly progress report deadlines, instead of as the same day as the quarterly progress report. We've always been pretty soft on this deadline anyway, with the exception of the last one. That one's a hard deadline on turning these in, but we're trying to help us to, as well as all of our grantees in getting this more streamlined. And so we're hoping that this 30 days will be a good news. The next one is we are clarifying the acceptance of insurance requirements for self-insured agencies. We've always accepted self-insured agencies insurance information, but we added in the grant agreement just some language that basically makes it easier to just say, yes, fine, you're self-insured, that's fine, just provide us a copy. The next item is early detection muscle monitoring. So Mike alluded to this earlier. So this change is that we now want starting in the 2022 grant cycle, 2023 grant cycle, we now want early detection muscle monitoring provided with every quarterly progress report. Now there is no change to the monitoring protocol itself. So the monitoring protocol itself requires early detection muscle monitoring monthly. It could be surface surveys, artificial substrates at a minimum. It depends on the calcium level of the reservoir. But either way, we want to get the data now quarterly. And it used to be sent to us at the annual report and at the final report. But again, now we're going to ask for it quarterly. All right, and then we are updating our quarterly progress report template to reflect this change. So that will be in the grantee resources webpage here in the next month or so, before the 2023 cycles grant agreements are in effect. All right, and then Olga will only allow PDF documents to be updated. This is not a new rule. We've asked for PDF documents always, but now we've put the stopgap on Olga so that folks cannot upload anything but an Olga document. That has to do with how it's filed and how we can review it more expeditiously. The next is the grantee needs to, this is not a new requirement, which is the grantee needs to put a note, put a brief, a bullet, a nugget on their webpage that discusses their project and this grant. But what is new about this is that we're requiring that it be done within the first year of the grant. So that means that we would get a snippet in the annual report showing that this was done. Conversely, how it's been done in the past is we would get that snippet that it was been done at the very end of the grant. And so our applicants could have put the note up, a week before the grant ended. And so that doesn't really help our public outreach. So now we're requiring it to be done within that first year. All right, and the next is a further refinement of language for federal agency applicants. There is an off-ramp for federal agencies to get some advanced funding. And instead of reimbursement, but not all federal agencies need this. It's not carte blanche, but we just ask that you get in contact with us if you are a federal agency looking to apply. We encourage it, but there will be a limitation on how much funding we can give at any one time before each task is complete. The next is further refinement of launch ramps and parking lots as non-reimbursable items. That's language you'll see in the guidelines, and that is just that we've had a couple applications that had some question about that, so we thought we'd just address it right off the bat in the guidelines. And so that's to say that we can cover a parking area that's specifically related to maybe like a staging area for decon, that sort of thing, or, you know, a line area for decon, parking area that's specific to decon, that sort of thing. This program does not fund general parking areas and ramps. We can fund at a ramp, you might want to have a gate arm to block unlawful entry. That is something that could be covered. Okay. And then lastly, it's a further refinement of language about payment requests, and that is where it says in the grant agreement language already, it discusses receipts and paid invoices, and we added the word paid before the word invoices, just to further clarify. Yes, we have a question?
Yeah, Carol, we've got one question in the chat you might want to address. So is there a specific location on the website where that snippet needs to be?
No. Mike might have a recommendation of where he's seen most of them. It's usually related to the inspections and that sort of thing, but we don't require it to be in a certain area. The thought, though, is that we want voters to see it, you know, and have public encouragement, not only for the clean, drain, and dry type of message and the importance of that related to quagga and zebra mussels or any invasive species, frankly, but also because this program is funded by the state's mussel sticker. And so we like to have that plug of your boating dollars at work, if you will. So that's the other reason why we like to have this plug on the website, your websites as grantees. So you can help us determine where that's best on your own website. Did that answer? Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Some highlights. All right, so this is all information that's already been covered, but I just want to highlight it, special nuggets, okay? So the first is we must ensure that you update all your information. So submit everything into Olga by the application deadline. It's a hard deadline, May 19. And please upload the documents in PDF. And then upload letter from CDFW. If you're going to apply for a tier 2 project, you have to include that letter that's dated since 2016, and you have to upload your prevention plan. This is if you're applying for tier 2. Tier 1 doesn't have that requirement for those. You don't have to have the letter, and you don't have to obviously have the prevention plan because you're going to be working on it. Okay, and then this is so important, even for returning applicants. We need a complete application. So even though we might have a copy of all this from you, from even a current grant you have with us, we need it again. It's a new year, new cycle, competitive process. You must prioritize, excuse me, within Olga if you're going to submit more than one application. You must upload your early detection mussel monitoring data that's no older than March of last year. You must list out materials and supplies in Olga. Now, Tim will talk about this a little more in the Olga portion. But the important thing here is that lesson learned that we fund materials and supplies for this program. It's a great blessing, but we can't have just a general ask of you need $2,000, $5,000 for materials and supplies. We need to hear what they are. So you can say, you know, it's for even office supplies or field related office supplies. Maybe it's clipboards, maybe it's waterproof paper, maybe it's banding for the boats, or, you know, maybe it's related to uniforms and shirts that you need for your inspectors. You know, it can be all those kind of things, but you need to list those kind of examples out for us because we have to be able to show, you know, to an auditor someday that that this is what we agreed to. Okay, and then the next is if you will use consultants, which we encourage, we fund consultants, please though, here's the trick. You need to know that work can only be reimbursed during the grant term. So consultants, I think we have some on the line. Welcome. But the work done outside of the grant term is not covered. And the trick part is the trickiness of that is the application period is not covered. Then the other trickiness that you have to watch for is the grant will expire in 1 month, and we'll get to that. It'll be in October in 2 years. And so the tricky thing you have to watch is 30 days after that is when all the final documents are due. And that 30-day period is not reimbursable. So it would be very important for consultants to get all their work done before the grant deadline, or as much as you can get done before the grant deadline before you turn it back over to the grantee. I'm talking as a consultant, as like a subcontract under the grantee. This grant program only goes to the owners and managers of reservoirs. The grant does not go directly to a subcontractor, but a subcontractor can be used. Next slide. Highlighting that a resolution or letter of approval needs to be submitted to have a complete application. And the detail of that is that a resolution version can be draft or final at the application stage. And that's because that type of an agency applicant has an agency that has a board. So we want to allow more time for the board to meet and vote on that. But if you're a federal agency, then you don't have a board over you. And so we would have a letter of approval uploaded at the time of application. The narratives, we want to highlight, we have these templates on the website to apply. So we have the narrative, the scope of work, table deliverables. Make sure that everything is crosswalked and the information in one is in the other. And please don't forget to fill out the outreach events in the table deliverables template. And don't worry if you think you're committing to outreach events, there's 3 required. And if you're committing to those now, that will be done in the next 2 years, and there could be changes. And believe me, we saw that with COVID. That's okay. We just need to see representative events that you've thought about it, and these are the things that you think you'll be attending. And I've already kind of mentioned the line item and task budget. They have to align, and the scope of work as well. And all types of staffing, please remember that seasonal, permanent consultants, doesn't matter what type of staffing we're talking about here, leave time is not covered. Okay. And so if we're talking about consultants and you have that built into your full package fee, our grantee would have to pay for the difference of that because the grant won't cover the leave time portion. Okay. And then upload all management and ownership documentation at the time of application to have a complete app and highlight the applicable sections. So please don't give us a 20, 40, 100-page document that says here, this shows where our management authority is. No. Upload it, but then tell us this is what the page, the line, the paragraph, this is where it is. Please, that is a requirement. Some recommendations. Obtain all the information on our webpage, especially those guidelines. Start the process early. Know that you can start your application, get your sign in, get into Olga, familiarize yourself, watch the Olga webinar, the separate video, and start. You don't have to submit yet. You can save and work along the way. And you do have to save by the deadline, which is 5 p.m. on May 19th. And then also watch the webinar, which I already mentioned, and then review your completed app before you hit that submit button. Once you hit submit, it's in. Okay. Timeline. So Olga opened for submissions as of this last Monday. Today's the presentation. Applications, again, can be accepted until May 19, 5 p.m. Notification of the award decision, yay or nay, or a middle ground where we might award, but we may not award the full ask. That will be notified to all of our applicants by September. And will be approved grants, and they will be encumbered by October. And then they're 2-year grants. So it would be October 2025 when they expire. All right. Any questions before we take a break? Nothing in chat? Okay, we will take a 10-minute bio break. Does that sound good? And Tim can put up a counter for us. And when we return, we'll see if there's any burning questions. Might do a little fact check with you, and then we'll move into the Olga portion. All right, thank you. Hi, welcome back. I'm going to put a question out here to you. And if you can put the answer in the chat, that would be much appreciated. So, true or false? You can just say T or F, or you can do thumbs up, thumbs down. For this grant, match is required. Yay! Okay. Good, Eddie. Okay. Next one. Ready? For a Tier 2 application, you can include 2 reservoirs as long as the projects are the same at both reservoirs. True or false? Yay! Okay. Turn it over to Tim.
Okay, so now we're going to move on to the second part of our presentation. This is an overview of how to use the online grant application program, also known as Olga. By now, hopefully you've read the Olga step-by-step instructions found on the Quagga and Zebra Mussel Infestation Prevention Grant Program website. The instructions are a walkthrough on how to register and use the online grant application program. Additionally, you can refer to the Olga instructional webinar video. This can also be found on the website under application materials. You can see a screenshot of where to find this link here. I'll also include that at the end of the presentation in the chat. Next slide, please. Here's some notes about the instructional webinar video. There are a few things to keep in mind. The webinar uses other DBW grants as an example. So we want to make sure when you start the grant application, you select the QZ MIP 23 grant program. The webinar also shows Leticia Padilla as a contact for the QZ grant program, but I now have that position. Additionally, I'd like to note that the last 5 minutes of the video is not relevant to the QZ grant program. The QZ grant award notice and executed grant agreements are emailed. Notifications are not sent via Olga. The only email you will receive from Olga will be confirmation that your application was submitted. Next slide, please. Here's some reminders about the Olga system. I'll also show you some visuals of some of the items I'm referring to here in the next slide. Anything with an asterisk must be filled out. When applicable, upload documents in PDF where there's a blue arrow. Side note, all documents being uploaded are to be in PDF format. Documents specific to the QZ grant are available in the Show Documents link. Please review each of the documents listed as they provide important information that you need to know while applying. The show tree is a useful way to navigate through pages you've already worked on. Do not use the back or forward arrows of your web browser. Only use the forward and back arrows located in the Olga screen. If you use your browser's built-in navigation buttons to try to move forward or backwards in the application, Olga will boot you out. And also keep in mind, Olga's navigation arrows are not the only way to navigate through your application. The show tree icon is very useful, as well as the tabs across the top of the screen. Next slide, please. Here's the screenshot of what I was talking about in the previous slide. Notice the yellow boxes, those show the forward and back buttons. You never want to use back and forward function built into the web browser while working at Olga. This will just cause issues. So always use these navigation buttons here shown in the yellow boxes. Another way to navigate through all the web pages to use the show tree function. That is the icon located in the green box. This will display a list of different sections of the Olga application. The show documents button located where you see the blue box contains documents with instructions to show you how when you're applying. The grant agreement template is also found here. Two of the last items I want to mention is that you want to save your work on each page. The save button is located in the red box. You also want to click the validate button when you finish each section, because Olga will know when you've made any errors. The validate button is located 2 buttons over from the red box. To submit your application, you must be in preview mode. When in preview mode, make sure to save a copy of your application and review it before submittal. Make sure your documents have uploaded correctly before submitting. Once you have submitted your application, you'll receive a confirmation that your application was submitted. Next slide, please. Here are a few more details about the budget portion of the grant application process. I also believe this is something Kara mentioned in an earlier slide. We want to make sure that the applicants are listing all materials and supplies they're requesting funding for in both the task and line item budget. We want specific items listed here. The items in both task and line item budget must match. The screen shown here is a screenshot of the task budget. Next slide, please. Here's an example of the line item budget. This is the same case as the task budget. Please make sure you list out all materials and supplies you're requesting funding for, and make sure these items match your task budget. The line item budget portion of the application only allows for a total maximum number of 40 characters in the description. To add more information here, click on the notes icon located all the way to the right of each line. The notes screen will allow for much more information to be attached. I'll show a demonstration of this at the end of this presentation. This is also related to the RSVP question number 6. Will Olga allow more space this year for listing items to include specific categories? While the task budget will allow for as many characters as you need, the line item budget is limited to only 40 in the description portion. So you want to make sure to click on the notes section, the notes icon all the way to the right to add more information.
Over those the notes.
There's a question in the chat.
Oh, okay, let me see. Oh.
I can read it out.
Oh, I see it. So there's a question. The notes will be enabled this year. It has not been in previous years. Yes, the notes function will allow you to enable is enabled so you can put in more information in this portion of the application. Okay, next slide, please. All right, thank you for joining us today. This will be wrapping up our presentation. Please see our contact information here. Are there any other questions regarding Olga? Or any other questions with anything else we've covered today? So we'll be sending out an evaluation about the webinar to those who RSVP'd. If you did not pre-register for this workshop, please send an email to the QZ team. The email is listed here. It's qzgrant@parks.ca.gov so that we can communicate with you. Our recording of this webinar, as well as the questions and answers that were discussed, will be posted in a separate document on our webpage.
There's a question.
also, well, we'll read that question in a second. We will be online here until May. So if you think of more questions too, we can help you with that. And we're also going to use this extra time to go online for Tim to do a live demo of Olga. And then after that, if there's time, then Mike will go through our web pages live and show you where the application materials are, as well as onto our subpage for the grant and show you what's there. This is if you were to be awarded, you'd see where that information is. And then we can also, if there's time, highlight a PSA, a video PSA from one of our grantees and share that as well. So that was what we thought we would do with this extra time. But let's first answer questions. And also, what about the putting the URLs in the chat? Okay, Tim will do that while we're looking at questions. Okay, so Kim asked, can we submit an application with more than one reservoir? I mean, more than 2 reservoirs. Okay, so it depends what application we're talking about. For a tier 1, it can be as many as you want to put in there. But for a tier 2, it can only be up to 2 max. But again, there's no limit on how many applications you submit. So you could do 2 reservoirs in one application and then do another application for tier 2 and put one. For tier 1, there is no limit. Put as many in there that you are the owner or manager of. But okay, good. Have to do early detection muscle monitoring though for each reservoir that you are applying for. But it is a covered item. So you might want to include that in your application to ask for grant funding for. So I guess Elizabeth's bringing that up so to make sure that you know what your requirements would be. Okay, and there is $200,000 maximum funding for a tier 1 application. So there's that to keep in mind too, although that's quite a bit of money. You could cover quite a bit of reservoirs with that. Okay, that answered Tim's question. Oh. Did they hear me? All right, sorry, I guess my mic wasn't on, but I think hopefully it covered through Tim's mic. Okay.
There's a hand up.
There's a question. You can question. Somebody has their hand up. Let's grab that. Looks like it's Angela. Can we unmute her?
Hello, I'm unmuted.
We'll try to unmute you.
Okay.
Go ahead, Angela.
Hi, can you hear me? Yes, okay, great. So my question is regarding outreach materials. I'm really excited that outreach materials are covered in this grant. Sometimes we get things that just aren't popular. And so like water bottles one year were really popular. We went out, you know, they had Clean Drain Dry on them, a picture of our lake. And then the next year we didn't, nobody wanted a water bottle. So we have a bunch of water bottles. So I just wanted to make sure that for outreach materials, as long as it falls under the category of outreach materials, if it's not specifically listed, if we can have some leniency with that, whether it's little, you know, we've done like little temporary tattoos that say Clean Drain Dry, or a little quagga mussel with a big red X through it. And those have been really popular, but maybe one year they won't be popular and we might do better with stickers that say Clean Drain Dry, or something like that. So I just wanted, I'm going to list as much things as I can think of that we've got in the past, but there might be some things that we might replace them with if we're finding, or if we find something really cool that is an outreach item that we might not have thought of before when I'm writing the Olga application. So I'm just trying to get some idea on leniency for those kind of things.
Yeah, so some of that stuff that you mentioned would be considered incentives, and that, so those the various fun word tchotchkes and all those kind of things, those kind of things are not covered. So when we say outreach, we mean a little more you know, media items that are things related to your booth. I know that could go both ways on what you're asking. Sometimes you want some of that stuff at your booth, but It would be more like tablecloths for your booth, the covers, you know, the shade structures for your booth. If you wanted some display items, that sort of thing. But public giveaways, we consider those incentives, and the program had funded them in the past, but probably like 2018, 19, I think is when we stopped funding the giveaways. And that was because we had an executive order from our governor that said no giveaways. So, no. But you're welcome if you know there's a gray area. As you know, we don't always have an all-inclusive list because every year there's great new ideas that are coming to us. You're welcome to throw some things in there, you know, as ideas, and then we can scratch them out when the whole team and Eddie reviews. But I know the tattoos and, you know, pens and those kind of things wouldn't be covered by the grant. Not to say that you can't have them at your booth, but the grant wouldn't cover that. Somebody else had a question? Okay. Well, you're welcome to keep putting questions in the chat. In the meantime, let's use our time well. And Tim, you can pull up our live demo of Olga.